Sulam, creo que ya estamos para comenzar.
Así es, Camilo, muy buena tarde. Son las 5 en punto de la tarde en Colombia y me indican que ya es de mañana en Australia. Entonces, a todos nuestros invitados que nos acompañan desde ese hermoso país, muchísimas gracias por atender este llamado. Es la segunda ocasión que los acompaño en medio de estas reuniones tan importantes que van de la mano de esos temas que son importantes para el sector ganadero y nosotros poder recibir esos ejemplos y esos casos de éxito por parte de Australia. Y este es un trabajo conjunto que se viene realizando entre Fedegan, el Fondo Nacional del Ganado, y la Embajada de Australia. Entonces, en la tarde de hoy, muchísimas gracias a nuestros invitados, a nuestra embajadora en Colombia, la doctora Erika Thompson, que nos acompaña nuevamente, y Camilo, que estará en la presentación conmigo, Camilo Peña, presentando a cada uno de los exponentes en la tarde de hoy. Bienvenido, Camilo, y también a quienes nos acompañan, a nuestros panelistas y también a sus equipos de trabajo, quienes arduamente han articulado con nosotros todo este proceso. Importante indicarles que la reunión que habíamos tenido en el evento inaugural próximamente estará disponible en la plataforma de YouTube de Fedegan y allí podrán tener toda esa información tan valiosa que se presentó en su momento. Y esta también se subirá posteriormente para que tengan acceso a toda esta información de gran importancia para el sector ganadero, no solamente en Colombia, sino también a nivel internacional. Y les cuento que ya sumamos 46 personas conectadas a esta hora. Y es importante que nos digan desde qué parte del territorio nacional nos acompañan y también si en esta oportunidad están conectados desde diferentes países. Pues en la ocasión anterior nos acompañaban desde Chile, también habían personas conectadas desde Australia. Entonces para nosotros es muy importante. Ahí está el reporte. Jorge López nos indica que está desde Lima, Perú. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos en la tarde de hoy. Entonces, damos la bienvenida formal a este evento titulado Exportaciones de ganado en pie de Australia, de la finca al plato, consideraciones claves de bienestar animal para la producción del ganado. Hoy es 15 de junio en Colombia y son las 5:03 de la tarde y le doy la palabra a la señora embajadora Erika Thompson para que nos dé la bienvenida. Adelante, tiene usted la palabra.
Gracias, Sulam, gracias. Y gracias a todos nuestros amigos de Fedegan y gracias por venir a nuestro evento esta tarde. Es un honor darles la bienvenida al segundo evento de nuestra serie Innovaciones de la Industria Australiana. En nuestro primer evento, el 12 de junio, discutimos sobre cómo abordar un desafío bastante complejo. Cómo reducimos las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero de la ganadería para que podamos garantizar que el sector sea capaz de construir un futuro sostenible, productivo y rentable. Y hoy daremos un paso adelante enfrentándonos a un nuevo reto compartido, abordando la pregunta: ¿qué importancia tiene el bienestar animal para el consumo y la producción sostenibles de carne de vacuno y productos lácteos? Las prácticas agrícolas sostenibles son el núcleo de la agricultura en Australia y la escala, la diversidad y la variabilidad de la agricultura australiana exigen que los agricultores australianos mantengan los más altos estándares de cuidado de la tierra y de los animales para poder sobrevivir. Muchos de los sectores agrícolas australianos han desarrollado marcos de sostenibilidad para guiar y supervisar sus prácticas en el futuro, o han desarrollado herramientas que garanticen la aplicación de las mejores prácticas en sus fincas. Estas iniciativas impulsadas por el compromiso de Australia a los sistemas de producción que dan prioridad a la salud del medio ambiente, el bienestar de los animales y los alimentos seguros y nutritivos. La semana pasada conocieron el trabajo que se está realizando en Australia para reducir las emisiones de carbono y las razones por qué creemos que la reducción de las emisiones aumentará la sostenibilidad y la productividad de los mercados de carne y los productos lácteos en el mundo. Esta semana escucharán a dos destacados expertos australianos sobre por qué consideramos que el bienestar animal es otro paso crucial hacia la sostenibilidad, la productividad y la protección del futuro del mercado de la carne y los lácteos. Tendrán la oportunidad de escuchar al Dr. Edward Narayan, profesor titular de Ciencia Animal en la Universidad de Queensland. El Dr. Narayan es un destacado experto en fisiología y bienestar animal. Los recomiendo que investiguen el fantástico trabajo que realiza su laboratorio de estrés en la Universidad de Queensland. Y la doctora Kate Makin, nuestra consejera de Agricultura para México, América Central y Colombia. Pero antes de llegar aquí en Sudamérica con nosotros, Kate ha sido una figura clave en el desarrollo de las políticas y regulaciones del gobierno australiano en torno al bienestar animal. Tanto Edward como Kate nos mostraron por qué creemos que el bienestar es un componente clave en la productividad del sector. Como la creciente importancia que el bienestar animal tiene para los consumidores y el impacto que tendrá en la supervivencia del mercado. También explicarán cómo el bienestar de los animales se está convirtiendo en una posible barrera técnica para el comercio, no solo para el ganado vivo, sino también para la carne de vacuno y los productos lácteos. Y por último, expondrán cómo estamos utilizando la ciencia y los datos para desarrollar nuestras regulaciones y establecer el estándar global en estos temas. Estoy muy orgulloso de que nuestros expertos australianos pueden transmitir algunos de esos conocimientos a nuestros amigos y socios en Colombia y América Latina el día de hoy. Finalmente, si trabajamos juntos, podremos construir un futuro sostenible y productivo para los sectores de la carne, de vacuno y los productos lácteos. Gracias a todos y muchísimas gracias a Sulam.
Muchísimas gracias a usted por sumarse a esta causa de trabajar de manera conjunta, como usted lo ha dicho, por el bienestar de los animales y también para seguir avanzando y seguir forjando esas buenas prácticas que pueden mejorar nuestra productividad en Colombia. Y pues como usted lo mencionaba, más allá de las obligaciones normativas que pueden existir, todos deberían hacerse responsables de velar por el bienestar animal, porque todos se verán beneficiados con su cumplimiento, los animales, las personas y el ecosistema. Es decir, es un engranaje que se tiene en el momento en que podamos avanzar en esa materia. Ya sumamos 84 personas conectadas a esta hora y como se los indicaba al inicio, esta grabación estará disponible en nuestra plataforma de YouTube. Ya Camilo va a dar paso a los conferencistas que tenemos esta tarde. Contamos con interpretación simultánea y pues ustedes en la parte inferior pueden seleccionar el idioma en que quieren escuchar la presente conferencia. Entonces, después de darles estas instrucciones, Camilo, tiene usted la palabra. Adelante y buena tarde y me place compartir con usted nuevamente este espacio.
Muchas gracias, Sulam, por la bienvenida, por tus palabras, embajadora. Muchas gracias por resaltar todos estos aspectos que son claves en la relación con todo el sector ganadero en Colombia. En todas estas charlas hemos tratado de mostrarles un poco cómo interactúan industria con gobierno, con el sector educativo. Entonces, la sesión de hoy nuevamente es una integración de esas dos perspectivas. Entonces, nuestra presentación de hoy se divide en dos partes. En la primera parte vamos a contar con una intervención de la doctora Kate Makin, que como mencionó la embajadora es consejera para Centroamérica y Colombia, el Departamento de Agricultura, Agua y Medio Ambiente del gobierno australiano, y ella hablará sobre algunas consideraciones relacionadas con salud y bienestar animal que hacen parte de los estándares mínimos australianos que la industria debe cumplir para la exportación de animales en pie. El propósito de estos estándares es asegurar la gestión de todos los riesgos para la salud y bienestar del ganado a todo lo largo de la cadena de suministro de exportación que va desde el abastecimiento hasta la finalización del desembarco en el extranjero. Luego de la intervención de la doctora Makin, entonces vamos a tener la presencia del doctor Edward Narayan, que nuevamente, como mencionó la embajadora, es un académico de la Universidad de Queensland, una universidad referente a nivel mundial en todos estos temas. Entonces, de verdad que estamos enfrente de una de las personas más expertas en el tema que nos compete hoy. La producción de ganado, como muchos de ustedes saben, es un sector económicamente valioso para Australia. Lo ha sido durante muchos años y durante esos años las razas de ganado en Australia se han mejorado con avances genéticos y genómicos principalmente, aunque aún se necesita mucho más investigación en todas las áreas que tienen que ver con bienestar animal de la producción de ganado, y esto pues incluye las mejoras en todos los métodos para evaluar la salud y el bienestar del ganado en finca. Hoy el doctor Narayan les hablará mucho más en detalle sobre todas estas consideraciones, un poco sobre innovaciones tecnológicas que están ayudando a impulsar el bienestar del ganado y la producción ganadera de una manera sostenible en Australia, pues que esperamos que sea esta información de utilidad para poderla implementar en Colombia. Entonces, nuevamente esperamos que estas charlas sean de gran utilidad para todas sus actividades, y al final vamos a tener un espacio para unas preguntas. Entonces, si quieren ir incluyendo sus preguntas en la función de chat, y al final Sulam nos ayudará a transmitirlas a los expositores. Muchas gracias por su atención en un día lluvioso en Bogotá. Muchas gracias a todos los que se conectan desde Australia, desde diferentes países de Latinoamérica, y le damos paso a nuestro primer presentador, la doctora Kate Makin. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Camilo. Thank you for the very kind introduction, also, Ambassador. I will just start sharing my screen. Okay. Can everyone see this? Sorry. Bear with me one moment. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay, that's working? Yeah? Okay. Hello, everyone. As the ambassador said, my name is Kate Makin. I'm Australia's agriculture counsellor based in Mexico City, and I also cover Central America and Colombia. Before I started my time working with the Department of Agriculture in Australia, I worked as a veterinarian at the University of Sydney, and I did a PhD investigating causes of mortality in live export sheep. And so today I'll be talking to you a little bit about live animal, specifically livestock exports from Australia, and Australia's approach to regulation. So this infographic gives a bit of an overview of the process of a livestock export. The blue parts of the infographic show the steps of preparation that occur in Australia, and the red parts show the steps that occur in the importing country. It says Mexico on this page, but the process is essentially the same for any country. As many of you may already know, the process is actually not an easy one. It's quite difficult, and there's a lot of planning and risk management that has to go into each step to make the export a success. In Australia, livestock exports are strictly regulated. All of the steps that occur in Australia are regulated for all livestock exports, and for livestock that are exported for the purpose of fattening or for immediate slaughter, the steps that occur in the importing country are also part of our regulatory system. This slide just gives some of the statistics around livestock exports from Australia over the most recent years, and our largest export markets for cattle is Indonesia, for sheep is Kuwait, and for goats is Malaysia. That's just to sort of set the scene of the bit of the volume that we export. So in order to export livestock from Australia, you need to be a licensed livestock exporter. When you apply for a livestock export license, you need to submit what we call an approved arrangement, and that is a document that's like a business plan that outlines all the ways that you will ensure, as the exporter, that your exports comply with the Australian standards for the export of livestock. That's a standard that sets out all the animal welfare requirements, and also for any biosecurity requirements that the importing country has in place. The department assesses each exporter's systems and plans to determine if it meets all the regulatory requirements. And exporters need to prove on an ongoing basis that their exports are complying with their approved arrangement. And the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment in Australia conducts real-time verification and also audits exporters based on their systems. So the Australian standards for the export of livestock, which we call the ASIL, is a very important document. It sets the minimum animal health and welfare requirements that livestock exporters have to meet in order to export. It's enforceable by law in Australia, and it covers cattle, sheep, goats, deer, buffalo, and camels. There are 6 standards that cover the sourcing of the livestock and their preparation, land transport within Australia, management of the animals in what we call registered establishments, which I'll talk a little bit about in more detail, the preparation for loading onto the ship and the management of the livestock on board the ship, and in addition to those 5 standards, there's a separate 6th standard that covers all of the preparation for livestock that are exported by air. This is just showing one component of the approved arrangement that we call the approved export program. So for each country that livestock exporters want to export to, they have to have a specific export plan that details how they will meet all of the importing country requirements, including any preparations that need to be done by an Australian government approved veterinarian. And that can include things like vaccinations, treatments, inspections of the livestock prior to their departure from Australia. And registered establishments are the feedlots where livestock are assembled prior to export. So depending on the importing country, some countries require the livestock to have a period of pre-export quarantine before they can be loaded onto the ship or the aircraft. For livestock exported on ships by sea, that has to happen in a registered establishment. They also need to have an operations manual that's approved by the Australian government. Livestock that are exported by air sometimes also need to go to a pre-export quarantine facility, but it's a slightly different regulation, and they don't require ongoing approval. So those standards cover the preparation, transport, loading, and transport to the point of to the importing country and the point of disembarking. There's a separate set of regulations for livestock that are exported for fattening and immediate slaughter. And this is called the Exporter Supply Chain Assurance System. And it covers everything from the animals arriving in the importing country through to the point of slaughter of the animals. And as you can see, it's also enforceable under Australian legislation. Slide. I'm just going to go forward one slide. So the regulation is applied to Australian exporters. It's designed to ensure that all of the management of the animals, including up to the point of slaughter in the importing country, is carried out in accordance with World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE, standards. It was implemented for Australian livestock from 2011, following a major major problems being uncovered with the animal welfare standards of Australian animals, Australian cattle specifically, exported to Indonesia. All Australian exporters are required to have a system in place to ensure that any facilities in their supply chain in the importing country meet OIE recommendations. and the system includes control, traceability, animal welfare, and independent auditing. I'm just going to go back one slide. So this slide just shows what we mean by supply chain. So a supply chain generally is all of the parties that an exporter works within a particular country of import. So it can include multiple importers, multiple feedlots, and multiple abattoirs. It's not something that we approve for each consignment. Exporters have ongoing approval of their supply chains, and they can send multiple consignments to the one supply chain. Control is an important element of the SCAS system. It's essentially a demonstrated commitment by all parties in the supply chain to ensure that the animals remain within the approved facilities and that the facilities continue to comply with OIE requirements. Although it covers all of the steps in the importing country, the only party that's actually regulated by the Australian government is the exporter. So if other parties in the supply chain don't comply with all of the requirements, and if they break the rules, then the exporter can be held accountable for that non-compliance. And the most common response to a non-compliance is that we don't allow further livestock to be exported to that supply chain until the exporter can demonstrate a corrective action has been put in place. Traceability is the exporter system for demonstrating that all of the livestock remain within the supply chain. For Australian cattle and buffalo, that's almost always achieved through a radio frequency identification device, which allows for easy individual accounting of the animals. For sheep and goats, it's a group-based, or we say in Australia mob-based, but it means group-based system where they're accounting for animals in and out of facilities. And all of the sheep and goats also have an ear tag that should indicate where their property of origin is in Australia. The animal welfare standards that we use for the exporter supply chain assurance system have been developed based on the recommendations in Standard 7, Section 7 of the OIE code. So we basically have gone through that section, taken all of the animal welfare standards, minimum animal welfare standards that are applicable to the relevant species and the relevant types of facilities, and develop that into an SCAS animal welfare standard. Independent auditing is a really key component of the SCAS system. There's probably quite a lot of text on this slide, but essentially there are initial audits. So the exporter has to engage an independent auditor to go to the supply chain to audit all of the facilities against a checklist that we have, that we have prepared in consultation with industry, and give us an indication that that supply chain can meet the control, traceability, and animal welfare standards. Once the facility is approved, animals are allowed to be exported to that supply chain. And then there's ongoing independent performance audit reports that are conducted once Australian livestock have actually entered the supply chain. It's not uncommon for exporters and auditors to identify non-compliances in the supply chain and put their own corrective actions in place, but there's also instances where non-compliances are identified by other means, like members of the public or animal welfare organisations, and then the department is also required to put corrective actions in place in those circumstances. This is my last slide, and it just sort of has a bit of an overview of some of the recent reviews into the live export trade from Australia. All of these are aimed at improving animal welfare, and I'm not going to go into all of them in detail. All of these reviews are publicly available, and I can provide links to anyone who's interested. I think the purpose of including this here is to say that I think there's been like over 10 different reviews of Australia's live export system since 2003. And many of these have followed incidents of animal welfare issues being identified, often in the importing country and often by animal welfare organizations. And I think it really demonstrates the importance of industry, not only in live export, but in general, having a very proactive approach to animal welfare. It's something that's increasingly important, definitely in the Australian community. I think for consumers across the world, it's starting to emerge as a potential technical barrier to trade if countries don't have animal welfare standards that are acceptable to consumers, not only for livestock, but for meat, a range of meat and dairy products. I think there are real risks to the longevity and the social license of animal agriculture. So it is really important to have a proactive approach to ensuring good animal welfare outcomes for protecting the future of animal agriculture in Australia and Colombia, and I think in all countries that have large animal agriculture systems. That is all of my slides, so I will leave it there. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Kate. Muchas gracias, Kate, por la intervención. Y yo creo que damos paso de una vez al doctor Narayan para que comience su presentación. Edward, over to you. You can start sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilo, and thank you to all the panelist members and all of the audience from Colombia and around the world. A very good morning here from sunny Queensland, Australia. So Kate gave a very nice overview of animal welfare standards here in Australia. And so I would try to go a bit deeper into on the ground and from the farm all the way to the plate. And hopefully we can have some discussions at the end on animal welfare standards from the farm to the plate with some examples from Australia. So I am an animal welfare biologist and I am based at the Gatton campus in the School of Agriculture and Food Science of the University of Queensland. So animal welfare is basically the state of an animal. So what we are looking at is making sure that the basic needs of the animals are met. But when you look at the other side of the coin, the animal rights is also important. So you look at the intrinsic life and liberty of animals is the same as what's accorded to humans. So we are all morally responsible to be able to ensure that the animals that we care for do not suffer any discomfort, stress, or injury. Efficient and experienced livestock, handling technique, the facilities can actually help to eliminate pain and injury. And I will go into my talk and show you examples of how very simple interventions, something that can actually eliminate stress and lead to good animal quality and good product quality as well. So we will know, and you would also know that, it's about the dollar value of the product. So it all comes down to how carefully you look after the animal, which gives the product, whether it's milk or meat. And in this case, when you're looking at a meat product, then you are making sure that you reduce carcass damage, because food wastage is a big issue. You want to reduce mortality. You want to make sure that the animals are not stressed, and we look at that. So the other important thing is that everyone is becoming, ever more aware of what's happening and want to know more about our health, especially right now when we are in COVID crisis. We want to be, healthy and want to make sure that what we eat is, a good product. from a health-wise as well. So, better animals will also result in better conditions for the workers that are important for our livestock sector. So animal welfare is a very dynamic, ever-growing topic. We've come a very long way with regards to understanding animal well-being. So there's a whole continuum of interconnectedness between ethics, fairness, community values, cultural values, our feelings, a moral code in that sense. So on the ground itself, it's more to do with the interaction between the farm, the producer, and her animals. So we will look at some of that as well, and how we can actually look for subtle or acute challenging aspects which might be damaging to the animal. So to look at an overview, we can see that animals are being kept on a farming property and eventually end up in a sale yard, and they can actually be taken to a feedlot. So these red dots actually, or the stars, indicate the crunch points where animal welfare is very important, all the way to the to the end where we are actually wrapping up the animals in a product. So keep in your mind, think of some questions. What are the possible challenges that the animal would be facing in a sale yard, in a feedlot, and how can we assess that? So that's the whole message, hopefully, behind this presentation. A lot of effort, as we have heard in the previous talk, possibly, or we already know, has gone into growth. So, and also through genomics technology, we are applying cutting edge techniques to improve the animals phenotype, not only with regards to muscle or meat tenderness or particular aspects of resilience to a particular factor. We can interplay with various things, but as a overall, we want to look for a perfect cow. So what is a perfect cow? These animals are not robots. We know that she should be able to resist mastitis and avoid injury, be able to walk comfortably, and rarely needs issues with her hoof, milk yield, and metabolic disorders, and heat stress. I will talk a bit about heat stress as well in my presentation. So, genetics is something that we have a good take on, but now the environment is also important. The surroundings in which the animal is kept in is very important for both short-term and long-term evaluation of animal well-being. And one of the messages that I hope to give is that the animal, especially if you have a very unique phenotype, for example, you are trying to have animals with a particular trait, then their animal welfare is ever more important. So animals are exposed to a wide range of physical and psychological factors, as we all know. Some of these are easy to look after. For example, maybe in an intensive production system, you can look at animal hunger or thirst, and thermal stress maybe for an extensive production system. In a more pasture-based system here in Queensland, we are doing a lot of research into looking at thermal stress or heat stress. Like I said, a lot of work has already gone into understanding, and so it's a sort of a back of your palm approach. You already know how much of restraint you need to give to your animal, handling stress, novelty stress. We look at some of these things. So this is known as 5 freedoms, which I guess is something we all are very well aware of. But beyond that, what we are now doing in the last 10 years itself, we have moved deeper into understanding the mental state of the animal. So like I said, these animals are highly complex social living vertebrates. And so they have a very strong cognitive ability. So to be able to pick up subtle cues from the environment and understand what's happening to them from a psychological and physiological scale, which is now, I think, becoming and moving into the future, will be the powerful tools that will be available to everyone across the supply chain to be able to get more robust and more powerful data, objective, quantitative data that can actually tap and understand the states of animals, whether they are in a good, bad, or neutral state. So we know heat stress and cold stress, metabolic stress, and when they kick in, basically the animals reduce their food intake. I will not go too deep into all this, but you can have gut health problems with nematodes and things like and foot rot and things like that as well in some areas. We will look at some of the examples of animal welfare concerns in cattle, and I'll go through this in a summary and touch on some things in more detail, hopefully, to help us understand these things. So weaning, we know that it basically is used in our sector. We want to be able to be productive, but it's very important to understand the different, scales of the energy demands of the dam, and when do we actually undertake weaning. So for example, early weaning around 70 to 90 days of lactation is suggested to increase the reproductive rates in an extensive production system. When you talk about milk itself, it's a very high protein and high energy rich ingredient. So most of the milk produced by the cattle, it's 30% of it can it's metabolizable energy equivalent to what the calves get on pasture. But the problem is when you undertake weaning, it can lead to distress to your calves. So in a pasture-based system, it's quite common to separate the calf, and put it in a housing system known as a corral, and that can actually be a bit novel for the animal. So what are some of the things? Maybe we are not aware of this in the interim, but subclinical signs of stress. Things like decreased immune function, because this is a growing animal. So all the way from the womb throughout gestation, and now in the landscape, he is continuously developing his immune function, rumen function, and as well as his cognitive behavior. So being able to grow up into a well-performing, well-maintained animal. So this is very important that we look after calves, and take good care of them. So when you look at the grafting of a calf, you can actually put it close to a lactating cow. That can eliminate the labor and expense of bottle feeding. If you are bottle feeding the calves, you make sure that you have enough ratios of protein and fat, and you can actually put the calves in a starter feed and with good quality hay to increase its appetite, and making sure that the animal has got regular access to water, because water is obviously a very important parameter and aspect of the animal's well-being. One of the things that we also find in cattle is acidosis or bloating, which basically is a metabolic disorder, and it can lead to downstream effects on its milk production, and possibly it could lead to mortality. So something that you may already be aware of, how you assess this condition, and you can actually alter some of the nutritional regimes, but making sure that if the condition is becoming ever more complacent, then you should consult the veterinarian or the district veterinarian, so that they can help you make some decisions on the spot. We have got examples of how heat stress Like I said, here in Australia, we have a very warm environment, but today is unusually cold. But we are doing a lot of research, and you can see that heat-stressed animals. This is a thermal imaging image being taken from a cattle. With an example here from Lemon Animal Nutrition. You can see that in summer, basically there is a vast reduction in milk fat versus protein ratio. So the bar has gone down, and you have a vast increase in the number of somatic cell count. So if you were gonna produce this animal for milk, then this is a possible issue. So, how do you assess heat stress? What are the new technologies that's available to producers to be able to monitor heat stress in your animals? So we've looked at things like, collar tags or ear tags. Now the technology is becoming ever more sophisticated and really high throughput technology is being made available. And also with thermal imaging cameras, you can also use drones. These technologies are coming up, but you can see that it is in a simple manner assessed using the combination of temperature and the humidity. So it's called the temperature humidity index. And so for every area, you will have a THI. And if you have a greater amount of solar radiation, then the heat stress will basically be higher. And so we want to make sure that we continuously monitor. So for researchers, for engineers, our aim is to make sure that we provide the producer with technologies that can actually predict acute signs of heat stress and help the farmer to undercome with early intervention. So when you look at the temperature humidity index for a dairy cow, it's being set around 68. This may not be current because it's a bit old study, but which basically means that even at 50% humidity, the cattle is already starting to show signs of heat stress. So one thing we know that cattle and sheep, they are ruminants, and goats as well. So when they ruminate, then their rumen will become hot. And if they are exposed to a hot day or a hot week, then obviously they need more. Their threshold for heat stress will be much higher, and they will show signs of more heat stress. And one of the things you could see is, shallow breathing. Animals are sweating to overcome behaviorally some of these heat stress situation. But from a physiological point of view, me as a physiologist, we already know that if animals are showing extreme signs of, shallow breathing or panting, then possibly what it could mean is that the subclinical effect of heat stress has become ever more stronger. So we know that under heat stress, animals are not digesting their food enough. They show very unpredictable feeding behavior, and they can actually result in downstream effects on the animal's well-being. So it is very important that we look back and understand the climatic context of our production system and be able to understand how our animals are dealing with these scenarios. And one of the things you will see is that animals are actually showing signs of lameness. They may be mildly lame or moderately lame or severely lame. And you can see they will have issues with their hoof. So it is very important that we understand the problem early rather than very late, because when you have lots of animals under this scenario, then obviously you are losing a lot of dollar, down the track, and it will become ever more problematic and costly to overcome this phenotypic issue, because there's already a burden on the animal's fitness. So I wouldn't bombard you with too much of physiology, but basically animals have a mental state, like all of us. They communicate with each other, and there are specific regions in the brain excuse me, that can regulate your basic emotions. So fear, pleasure, as we know, some breeds of cattle are more temperamental than others. And a lot of work has gone into assessing the temperament of animals and to be able to understand that. But just for a reference, we know that the different regions of the brain is able to, partake in different functions. And now as researchers, what we are trying to do here in Queensland, actually this research is ongoing, is looking at stable markers of physiological well-being. Because when you look at welfare, you have got the physical aspects and you have the physiological aspects. And both of them combine to produce, you have an equation and you have either a positive or a negative sign. And some of these physiological markers are actually indicators of negative well-being. So for example, if you look at cortisol, many of us must have heard about this, is a major player with regards to stress, but it is mostly a sign of negative state of the animal. So when the animal is under heat stress, is poorly ventilated or overcrowded, we can actually assess this and we can see that the cortisol levels will be overly high. Now you must be wondering, why should I be measuring all these things? So if I have a herd of 1,000 cattle, how can I do that? The point of this is that these biomarkers or physiological indicators are, they have a certain degree of heritability to it. So I think for cortisol is around 0.2 or something. So it's linked to your genetics already. So even if you were able to assess this in a proportion of your animals, then at least it gives you a hard number to be able to then assess more clearly what's happening inside the brain of your animal. And it's not just by chance that one animal is showing something unusual and others are happy. If there's something ongoing, you can have enough power with just a few animals to have a good assessment. And then talking with researchers and veterinarians, we can actually make better assessments of what's going on to our animals. Because if you overly stress the system, then there will be alterations in the metabolic function. There will be a loss, because if you lose the fat and the muscle ratio, then obviously there will be issues with the carcass quality, which we will look at very shortly. So you must be wondering, maybe, as a farmer, what do I do? How do I understand this? You already know your animals. So one thing that Temple Grandin is a professor from the US, and she said to sink down and look at the animal's subtle signs. So if the ears are, poking forward or loosely upward, then they are alert and worrisome. And if the ears are backwards, then or hanging down, you can see that the animals are relaxed. So look for these things. We can also look at the white of the eye, which tends to decrease in a relaxed cattle. But remember that your animal is an animal. It's not a robot. It's actually got a lot of endocrinology, neurology, mechanics. It's like a Ferrari car, a very expensive one, but naturally it is able to manage itself, and the food and the water and everything that we provide her will eventually, and the care that we provide her will eventually lead to a good product that we all are hoping for. So I will not go too much into this, but we know, fear and stress is a problem, and even bruising in animals is an issue. Transportation injury, Australia is leading the way, like Kate said, in assessing these problems and working with producers and supply chain managers in Colombia and other countries. We want to reduce this and eliminate this, and we can actually assess stress and see that if the animal is happy, then will lead to full adaptation. What eventually happens is that if you see this, it's called the glycogen bucket. And eventually what happens is, if you increase the glycogen, is what gives the juiciness to the meat. And eventually what happens if you make holes in the bucket, then you lead to loss of that glycogen. And one of the biggest culprit is cortisol. So when the animal is stressed, the cortisol will suck up all the glycogen. So you can see stress, stress, stress. And when that happens, even though you might not see it with your eyes, but under the skin, this is already happening. And this is what here in Australia, and we all know, is called dark cutting. And the meat becomes really hard. So all the hard work that has gone into growing the cattle, all the blood and sweat then ends up being lost because of that, little problem here. Maybe there was something with regards to lineage, because we know we should give, let's say, around 24 hours of rest to minimize carcass weight loss and meat pH problems, which eventually results in a decrease in the carcass value. So we've done some work and we've seen, stress. This is in sheep, not in cattle, but we have shown that, eventually stress leads to increase in the pH of the meat. So, we can assess stress using behavior, physiology, performance. All these biomarkers are, available to us. You can do this anywhere in the world. And one of the other things that's available now is to be able to detect things in hair and feces, which is very interesting. So for example, a work that our colleagues here at the University of Queensland did in provision of shelter to cows in India. And we could actually measure tail hair and measure cortisol in the tail hair. So this is your blood vessel of the cattle. And you can see that the hair actually incorporates all the stress. And so every centimeter is one month of stress. So that's very interesting. That's like latest research. And you can actually then see that if the animal is under chronic stress, then eventually the fitness of the animal is ruined. And you can see it is actually undergoing some signs of stress. So we know that, stress will lead to a reduction in food intake, conception rates are being lost, reduced milk production, premature calves, that's a big issue, diseases and weakened immune system. So it's a whole interaction, and the systems is not just limited to cattle. We can see that heat stress, for example, the work that we have done, this is again in sheep model, but we've seen that heat stress leads to a vast reduction in the quality of embryos. And basically what happens is when you are doing, let's say, artificial insemination in cattle or AI, you will notice that in the heat stressed animal, there's a reduction in the ability of the animals to complete to a blastocyst state. So that is some research that I'm fascinated by, and I'm interested in that as well. So what are the interventions that we can put in place to actually help our animals? Maybe more shade in a feedlot, shade in a more trees, sustainable farming. It's a big thing, but a lot of work is going into that as well. Here in Australia as well, we are working with the conservation side of things, saving trees and saving cattle in the same time in terms of its performance. So some of the indicators which you may already be aware of, but maybe not, you can see the interaction between the cattle handler. So this is not the farmer, but the guy who's taking the cattle to the actual, to be slaughtered. And you can see kicking, hitting, prodding. We should carefully assess the body condition and look for lameness and other issues. And this should be a part of our, auditing and assessment of animal well-being, which is really important. So here as an example, you can see, some of the really critical issues like body condition, abnormality of the tail, lameness, other problems. And you can see like when you're loading the animal, the amount of poking being done is 85% of being poked, hitting, kicking of animals. They lead to downstream effects on the animal's well-being. So something we need to be aware of. And you can see over here, the gut health, you can assess this objectively and score the animal's gut. It doesn't have to be every animal, but a random amount of animals, you can do that and see, and trace it back to the farm. So sustainable farming or animal well-being is a whole supply chain approach. Here in Australia, we have the Sustainable Beef Framework. You can look it up, excuse me, and you can actually look at animal husbandry, profitability, brands of tea cover and grass, antimicrobial stewardship. Microbes are a big problem. Drench resistance is an issue as well. Climate is a problem. But I think number 6 is also very important, the health and safety of the people. Because if you are improving the environmental context of where the animals are kept, then the person who is looking after the animal, his or her health and safety is also being looked after. So I hope that this presentation has given you some aspects. Hopefully I cannot cover everything in a short talk like this, but it's very important that we start understanding, and collaboration is the key, I guess, to be able to do this. And one of the really great collaborations that I have been lucky to be a small part of is called Clear Farm. And I'll just play this video, give you an example of how we are assessing animal well-being from the farm to the supply chain. This is an example from Europe. We can replicate this in Colombia very easily. We have examples of dairy and pigs. So let's just have a play of this video.
Dairy cows and pigs represent the 2 livestock production systems with the highest share in Europe. Although the need for animal welfare is widely accepted as indispensable for sustainable farming, its assessment remains a challenge. Precision livestock farming technology offers better control and ameliorates farming processes. The EU-funded Clear Farm project aims to use PLF technology along with animal-based data to improve animal welfare throughout the production chain. In this sense, the project will co-design, develop and validate a platform that will collect data from different sensors on animal welfare, and it will offer the processed information to farmers and consumers to assist their decision-making. Consumers, producers, regulators and policymakers, among other actors of food industry, are involved from the beginning in the design of this new platform. The platform will be tested in different commercial farms of pig and dairy cattle from different countries. The objective is to be capable to inform the welfare status in a variety of production systems, considering geographical divergences within production systems in Europe. Clear Farm will use available sensors in the market, capable of controlling a wide range of variables related to animal behavior, physical and mental health, environmental impact and productivity. This data will be collected by a connected platform that, through an algorithm, will provide easy to understand information about animal welfare adapted to the different audiences. On the one hand, farmers will be able to see in a web page the updated information on the status of the animals, with an emphasis on early warning signals that can help them anticipate welfare problems and implement preventative measures. On the other hand, consumers will be able to know the product's welfare history, meat or milk, by scanning, for example, a QR code of the label that will direct them to a website with the information. Clear Farm intends to bring technology
Sorry about that.
To the service of livestock sector, with the aim of improving the lives of farmers, consumers, and of course, animals.
So with that, I hope that my presentation has left a positive message with regards to animal welfare, and all of the logos shown here. These are the leading organizations here in Australia who is doing great work. Cattle Council of Australia, Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, MLA, IMPC, National Farmers Federation. We all should join hands together in Australia and Colombia, and help each other to improve animal welfare, for the next 5 to 10 years. The questions are the same. We all know the problems, but finding innovative solutions is the key, and it needs collaboration, and it needs engineers, researchers, everyone. So thank you very much to Austrade and the panelists and the audience. I'm highly appreciative. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward. If you would like to stop sharing the presentation, and we'll move on to the questions. Perfecto, Sulam. Ahora sí tenemos un espacio para preguntas.
Así es, Camilo, tenemos un espacio para preguntas. Importante reportar la sintonía que tenemos a esta hora. Son 114 participantes que tenemos conectados en este momento. Agradecemos a la comunidad ganadera por atender este llamado. Quienes no conocen la comunidad ganadera, son ganaderos de todo el territorio nacional que hacen parte de nuestros grupos de WhatsApp en Fedegan y que atienden a cada llamado y sobre todo a estas iniciativas que van de la mano en el mejoramiento de cada una de las prácticas ganaderas que se vienen realizando en Colombia, y este convenio con la Embajada de Australia no es la excepción. Entonces, les agradecemos que a través del chat nos dejen sus interrogantes para poderlos despejar en los próximos 15 minutos que tenemos disponibles para las preguntas. Así es, Camilo, ¿no?
Correcto, entonces esperamos las preguntas de todos. En caso de que alguien tenga, las puede enviar por el chat.
Hace algunos minutos me preguntaban por el canal de YouTube de Fedegan. Lo ubican muy fácilmente, Fedegan, y ahí pues ustedes pueden suscribirse y le genera unas alertas también de cada uno de los webinars que tenemos nosotros, de cada una de las publicaciones, de los live que tenemos semanalmente sobre información de interés para el sector. Entonces, quedamos atentos a las preguntas que tengan para las dos presentaciones que tuvimos en la tarde de hoy.
Creo que quedó todo muy claro.
Sí, no hay
preguntas en el chat.
No hay preguntas, no hay preguntas. Ok, ahí nos están dejando uno de los panelistas el correo electrónico por si tienen alguna duda. Entonces pueden corroborarlo allí en el chat por si tienen algún tipo de inquietud. Bueno, ya está la primera. La hace Catalina Medrano. ¿Existe algún sistema de evaluación de las condiciones en las que salen los ovinos desde Australia a México? Creo que esa es para Kate, ¿no?
Kate can answer that.
Okay.
Okay, so I don't think we've had any sheep come from Australia to Mexico for a number of years, but any livestock export from Australia to any other country would be subject to the same regulations that I was talking about earlier. So it would have to be a licensed exporter, meet all the requirements, and if the sheep were for fattening or slaughter, then there would need to be approved facilities in Mexico as well. And those requirements don't apply to like genetic material, so semen and embryos that come sometimes to parts of Latin America.
Ok, muchísimas gracias. Hay otra pregunta. Ok. Adelante. Ok, había otra pregunta para el doctor Narayan. De por sí, ¿cuánto tiempo se debe tener una producción en un cebadero para tener una mejor producción en carne?
That is a very good question. In the feedlot, basically, the animals are being kept at different stages. So you could have an animal that has been just brought for slaughter, in the near future. or you could have an animal that has been brought early for finishing. So it all depends on the stage at which the animal has been brought. The picture that I showed you earlier. So the meat quality, as you may know, that the finishing period is very crucial. The last couple of months of the life of the animal. That's where the juiciness and the meat tenderness and all these things are paramount. But also they are quite vulnerable to extrinsic factors. So, for example, we did a study. This was in alpacas, not in cattle, but we actually had two groups, and one group was actually mixed, and there was accidentally we had a ram that broke in and caused a bit of a havoc. And we discovered that the meat quality and the stress was heavily impacted. So, the animals are telling us that we need to be more vigilant. We need to be more alert. We need to look at subtle signs of distress, because like I said earlier, that little moment can ruin the whole hard work that the producer has done to give you the best animal for the product, for the consumption. So feedlots are very important at the moment with regards to shade. A lot of research is being done here in Gatton and in Queensland with regards to provision of shade to animals. And also we are doing research to look at the feed intake and the feed that is being left over, using robots to assess the feed of the animals in a large scale situation. So thanks for your question, and I hope I alluded to something that may be useful.
Sulam, si quieres aprovecho, había una
Hay otra
pregunta
pregunta por parte de Salim Malof,
sí,
quien indica que estas condiciones y recomendaciones también podrían aplicarse para exportaciones de ganado puro.
Kate?
Yes. So I assume by pure cattle you mean like pure bred cattle for breeding purposes. Is that, I'm assuming that's where we're going. So they still have to meet the animal welfare standards from the point of preparing the cattle to the arriving in the importing country, and they still have to meet the importing country's biosecurity requirements, but we don't specifically regulate the animal welfare in the country, because the animals are essentially going to live the rest of their natural lives in that country. So it's sort of beyond the scope of what we're trying to achieve, which is ensuring that the animals that are there for a short time to be slaughtered soon after arrival, that their welfare is looked after.
Thank you, Kate. Yo voy con la siguiente pregunta y para no confundir la dinámica del idioma, la pregunta está en inglés, pero la pregunto en español. Puede ser para Kate o Edward, y es si saben cuánto invierte el gobierno australiano en temas relacionados con bienestar animal. Una cifra, si la conocen.
I don't actually have an exact figure, but I think I'll say in general that animal welfare regulation in Australia is, it's a bit complicated. So the Federal Department of Agriculture does all of the regulation that relates to the export of livestock and other live animals. So far as animal welfare standards for animals on farms in Australia, that is managed by each state and territory of Australia. There's a lot of work underway to try and harmonise those conditions, but so there's federal budgets and state budgets involved. I think the other thing worth adding is that we have a system of levies in Australia. So whenever people buy and sell livestock, they pay a levy. I can't remember exactly what the levy is. Maybe Edward might know, per animal. And a lot of that money, it's industry funds that goes towards research and development that people like Cattle Council and MLA and other organizations fund, and the type of work that Edward does sometimes. So a lot of the investment in animal welfare research and development is funded by industry and matched by government.
Yes, that's a very good point. So the levy is around, I think at the moment, just looking at the numbers, it's 92 cents per head for research and development, 13 cents per head for animal health. So like Kate said, a lot of investment goes into research. I can give you examples. We are doing a research at the moment, looking at the welfare indicators of sheep during transportation on a ship. Also earlier on, we did a research to look at heat load of cat or sheep at the point of exportation to some countries. I can allude to the next question, which is all regarding the exportation of live animals from Australia. Will it be phased out due to public pressure or practice that will be accepted in that country? I guess I can start with my thought on that, and then Kate can allude to that as well. Look, from a researcher perspective, like I have been involved in this for 15 or so years since PhD. We will continuously face pressure. Everyone has the right to say their views. Australia is leading the way with continuously improving animal well-being. And we have got billions of dollars already being invested in improving animal productivity and well-being. So when we are leading the way, then others will follow us naturally. So there is no other side to the coin then, because everything that happens from now into the future has to be positive, because meat is the natural protein, and naturally, we need to feed the world. We have underdeveloped, malnutrition countries. So Australia, luckily, has recognized these problems early and is collaborating, and collaboration is the key. So the practices that we have is world standard, above world standard, and hopefully we can help, because we can't change the traditions. So the traditions that's in Colombia, that's something that you are gifted with. But if we can give some scientific aspects to our experiences that may help improve your systems, then let's do it. So that's the attitude that I think we will need moving into the future. Thank you.
Look, I mean, I'll just add to that. There is constant pressure on, particularly on live animal exports in Australia, particularly on animals that are exported for slaughter. But also generally, there's quite a lot of pressure globally right now on animal agriculture in general, and people who feel that we should be moving towards plant-based diets and phasing out animal agriculture for a range of reasons. And I think that's sort of why we're having this discussion, and we had the previous discussion on sustainability, is that the Australian government certainly is of the view that animal agriculture can be sustainable, can be safe, can be done in accordance with good animal welfare practices. And I just add specifically on the export side, when we started implementing the supply chain assurance system, which is the welfare work that we do in importing countries, it was, a lot of the countries that are our trading partners were quite resistant to that initially. And then we found, as things became bedded down, that it actually benefited not only the welfare of Australian animals, but the welfare of local animals in the countries where we trade, because all the facilities were coming up to a much higher standard. And that had flow-on effects for food safety, for worker safety, and for a whole range of things. And like right now in Kuwait, they use Australia's animal welfare standards as their domestic standard because they found it works so well. So I think in a lot of ways, that system has future-proofed the industry. I think other commercial factors will mean that some exports over time get phased out, but we legitimately have a system now where we can manage these animal welfare problems as they come up. And I think it actually is working really, really well.
Ok, Camilo, tenemos dos preguntas más y vamos cerrando. Entonces, si me permite, las voy a leer para que nuestros dos conferencistas pues seleccionen la que deseen dar respuesta. ¿Cuál es el tiempo de reposo o descanso para ingresar a la planta de sacrificio? Esa la hace Humberto Niebles. Y Osman Giovanni nos pregunta, ¿qué nos puede decir sobre los planes de contingencia para garantizar el bienestar animal en cada una de las etapas de la producción?
Kate, would you like to start? Or? I can add on to that. So
Yep.
basically with the lineage, the recommendation is at the moment 24 hours. You don't need to rest the animals overly long, because what's going to happen is there is a requirement, I believe, to keep the animal off feed, because that leads to the truck, with all the feces and all the other things that can be a bit of a problem. So lineage is something that has been tested, which is the resting period on the just before when the animals enter into the slaughter, you will see an area where the cattle will be sitting, or sheep will be sitting. So it's around 24 hours. But there is evidence, just looking at the work done here in Queensland, that if you give too much of rest, then it will lead to drastic reduction in body weight, which you don't want, because then you are losing the juiciness in the carcass. That's part one to the question. Part two was the different aspects or the things that we need to monitor. So like I said earlier, we need to look at the basic parameters like access to water, even with the animals, are they actually drinking, or are they showing some erratic behavior that may make them a bit vulnerable, even in a feedlot setting, let's say, for example. So most of it's like hands on deck. We just want to make sure that our animals are fit and healthy. Like Kate earlier said, we have this EATEC system, or the the National Vendor Declaration Form that we use to make sure. It's like selling a car, so or buying a new car or a second-hand car. So when you do that, you make sure the oil check, the engine and the tires, the seats are nice, the seat belt is there, everything is very similar for the cattle. So we want to make sure. And I was just amazed by the amount of information that goes. It's just like buying a house, even one cattle. I was attending a workshop yesterday. It's very similar. So a lot of data, a lot of information about the animal, and especially more important if the animal, like a cattle with a very unique semen, quality, or for a heritability trait, then that becomes ever more. We've had animals being sold for $20,000, individual animals. So it's very important. We need some paper-based assessment, and I think we need to then move it to online. Simple tools that can go back to the farmer's mobile phone or computer that can then look at long-term monitoring. I hope I answered your question, but those were some of my thoughts. Thank you.
Creo que era la última pregunta, Sulam.
La última pregunta. Bueno, miremos a ver una última pregunta. ¿Qué mercados exigen estándares de bienestar animal para exportación? Esa la hace Víctor López.
Animal welfare standards for export. So it depends a bit on where the animals are going into and from. So there's quite a lot of like live export of animals that happens in the EU, and that all of that transport happens by road, and they do have road transport standards. So far as countries that supply large numbers of livestock by sea, I think Australia is possibly the only country that has actual regulations in place for the welfare of the animals once they depart the country. New Zealand definitely had very similar standards to Australia. They were exporting only breeder cattle, but I believe they have paused that for the time being.
Thank you, Kate.
Listo, Camilo. Eso eran las preguntas que teníamos. Y les agradecemos a cada uno de ustedes por haberse conectado en la tarde de hoy. Ya casi registramos las 6:30 de la tarde en Colombia y en Australia apenas amanece. Entonces, muchísimas gracias a quienes fueron muy cumplidos, se levantaron y cumplieron esta cita para brindarnos información de interés y sobre todo contarnos esas experiencias a nivel internacional que para nosotros es de gran validez. Agradecimientos nuevamente a la Embajada de Australia en cabeza de su embajadora, Erika Thompson. Muchísimas gracias por apoyarnos y por estar presente durante todo este conversatorio en la tarde de hoy, por tener la mejor disposición siempre de acompañarnos en esos webinars. También a Camilo, a los equipos de trabajo y no menos importante a nuestros panelistas en la tarde de hoy. A la comunidad ganadera también muchísimas gracias por atender el llamado y también a nuestros invitados internacionales que nos acompañaron desde sus países de origen. Muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. No sé, Camilo, ¿usted tiene algo que agregar?
No, solo agradecimientos también para ti por toda tu labor de moderación y a todos ustedes por conectarse a esta sesión que creo que fue muy interesante.
A título personal, un placer acompañarlos. Mi nombre es Ulan Atún y espero volvernos a encontrar en una próxima oportunidad. Feliz resto de día, ya casi noche en Colombia, y feliz mañana para ustedes en Australia. Que pasen feliz resto de día.